Cowboy saved a giant Apache from a bear trap. Next day, the chief demanded he marry his daughter. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's incredible story. It was a crisp autumn day when the cowboy named Jake Riley first saw the giant Apache woman trapped in the bear trap. The cold winds howled through the hills of the American West as Jake rode his horse through the dense underbrush, searching for signs of game. His boots crunched against the dry leaves, and his horse's hooves made a rhythmic sound against the rocky trail. But the sound that caught his attention was different. It wasn't the usual rustling of wildlife or the wind. It was the sharp, desperate cry of a woman in pain. Jake reined in his horse, his instincts kicking in as he quickly dismounted and scanned the area. His hand instinctively reached for his rifle, but he paused when he saw her. The woman lay on the ground, her massive frame tangled in a bear trap. Her face was contorted in pain, her dark eyes wide with fear, but there was something else, strength. Despite the pain, there was a fierce look in her eyes that told Jake she wasn't going to go down easily. Her body was powerful, her arms and legs thick with muscle, a stark contrast to the delicate figure of most women he had encountered. She was no ordinary woman. Jake's heart pounded as he knelt beside her, carefully assessing the situation. He had seen bear traps before, but this one was particularly vicious, its sharp steel jaws clamping down with brutal force. The woman tried to move, her body trembling with the effort, but the pain was too much. Jake could see the blood staining her clothes where the trap had cut deep into her leg. "Hold on," Jake said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to get you out of this." She looked at him, her breath coming in. Shallow gasps, but her expression softened for a moment. It was clear she didn't trust him. In fact, she seemed to distrust everyone, but Jake didn't let that deter him. His hands worked quickly but gently as he examined the trap. The steel jaws were tightly clamped around her leg, and he knew he needed to be careful. He wasn't a doctor, but he had learned a few things from his time in the wilderness. As he pried the trap open, the woman let out another cry, but Jake held firm, determined to save her. After what felt like an eternity, the trap finally loosened, and the woman was free. She fell back against the ground, her breathing heavy, her eyes fluttering shut. Jake immediately checked her leg, assessing the damage. It was bad, but not life-threatening, at least not if he could get her help in time. As he looked over her, Jake realized she was no ordinary Apache. This woman was massive, much taller and broader than any other Apache he had encountered, and her muscular frame suggested a life lived with strength, not just survival. She was someone who could take down a bear, not just fight one off. He quickly tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt and tied it around her leg to stop the bleeding. Then he hoisted her onto his horse with surprising ease. He had no idea who she was or why she was out here alone, but he knew he couldn't leave her. As they rode toward the nearest Apache camp, the woman barely moved, her eyes closed in pain. Jake couldn't help but wonder about her story. Who was she? And how had she ended up in such a dire situation? It wasn't long before they reached the Apache camp. The moment Jake and the woman arrived, a figure appeared from the shadows, a towering man with broad shoulders and an air of authority. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and calculating. It was the chief. Without a word, the chief's gaze locked onto Jake, then to his daughter, who was still unconscious on the horse. The tension in the air was thick as the chief took a step forward, his presence commanding and powerful. Jake felt a lump form in his throat as the chief spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "You saved my daughter," he said slowly, "and for that, I owe you a debt. But there is something I require in return." Jake's heart raced as he wondered what this would mean. The chief's next words would change everything. "You will marry her," the chief said. "It is the only way to repay your debt." Jake stood frozen, unsure of what to say. He had never intended to get involved with the Apache people, much less marry a woman who was clearly stronger than most men he had ever met. But the chief's words left him with little choice. The debt had to be paid, and what Jake had saved her from was far more than a simple bear trap. This woman was no ordinary person. She was a warrior, a leader, and now, she was someone he would be bound to for the rest of his life. The chief's gaze remained intense, and Jake could feel the weight of his words pressing down on him. The moment hung in the air like an unfinished story, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He had come to help, to save a woman from certain death, but now the reality of what he was being asked to do was sinking in. He had not expected this. He had never imagined that his simple act of kindness would lead to such a demand. He stood there, frozen, trying to process the words that echoed in his mind. "You will marry her," the chief had said. "It is the only way to repay your debt." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His mind was racing, thoughts colliding in confusion. He glanced down at the woman still slumped on his horse, her unconscious form barely moving, and he wondered what kind of life she had led to get here. He had never seen someone like her. Her strength, her presence, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The chief's voice broke through his thoughts. "Do not mistake this for an act of kindness," the chief said, his tone unwavering. "This is a debt of honor. You saved my daughter's life. Now, you must take her as your own." Jake felt his chest tighten as he looked at the powerful man in front of him. The chief was not just a leader of men, he was the very heart of the Apache tribe. He carried the weight of generations on his shoulders, and his words were not just a request, they were a command. Jake had heard stories of the strength of the Apache people, of their fierce warriors and their unwavering loyalty to their own. But standing before him now, with the chief's eyes boring into his soul, Jake realized just how much power this man truly held. "I do not know if I can," Jake finally managed to say, his voice barely more than a whisper. The chief did not seem surprised by the hesitation. Instead, he stepped closer, his face softening for the first time since Jake had arrived. "You will learn to love her," the chief said. "You will learn what it means to stand by her side. And in time, you will see that this is not a burden, but a blessing." Jake felt the weight of those words, but still, doubts lingered in his mind. He had never planned on marriage, let alone marriage to a woman so unlike the others he had known. The thought of sharing his life with someone so strong, so different, made him uneasy. And yet, there was something in the chief's words that struck a chord deep within him. He had saved her life, yes, but now he was being asked to give up his own life, to give up his own freedom, in exchange for a bond that he did not fully understand. The next morning, as the sun rose over the vast expanse of the desert, Jake found himself standing at the edge of the Apache camp. The woman, whose name he had yet to learn, was still unconscious in the tent where he had left her. The chief had insisted that she rest and recover before anything else could be discussed, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. He was a man of action, a man who had spent his life working the land, facing the challenges of the wild. But this was something completely different. Jake paced back and forth, his boots kicking up the dry dust beneath his feet as he thought about the future. The thought of living among the Apache, of marrying a woman so different from anyone he had ever known, was both thrilling and terrifying. But deep down he knew he could not turn his back on the life he had saved. As the hours passed, the reality of his situation began to settle in. He was no longer a free man. He was bound by a promise, by a debt of honor, to a woman he barely knew and a people he had only just met. He had saved her life, but now he had to live with the consequences. The morning passed in silence, the camp slowly coming to life as the Apache warriors prepared for the day ahead. Jake knew that he could not put this off any longer. He had to face the woman, and he had to face the chief. With a deep breath, Jake made his way to the tent where the woman lay. He didn't know what to expect, but he was certain of one thing. His life was about to change forever. I have to admit, as Jake entered the tent, his heart was racing. The reality of his situation was beginning to feel all too real. He had been thrown into a world he didn't fully understand, with expectations that were far beyond what he had ever imagined. He stood at the entrance for a moment, taking in the dimly lit space. The air inside was heavy with the smell of herbs and smoke, a typical scent of the Apache people. At first, all he could hear was the sound of her breathing softly. She was still unconscious, her large frame resting on a blanket on the ground. Her face was peaceful now, free from the pain she had been in earlier. As Jake stepped closer, he couldn't help but notice just how powerful she looked. even lying there. Her arms were like tree trunks, her legs thick with muscle. She was not like any woman he had ever known. And yet, despite her imposing appearance, there was something gentle about the way she rested, something that made Jake pause. He wasn't sure what to expect from her, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't in control of this situation anymore. He had saved her life, yes, but now it seemed like everything was slipping through his fingers. As the hours passed and the sun began to set outside the tent, the woman stirred. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and Jake could see the confusion in her gaze. As she looked around, her hand instinctively moved to her injured leg, the place where the bear trap had bitten into her flesh. Jake moved to her side, offering her a gentle smile. "You're safe now," he said quietly, trying to offer comfort. She blinked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak at first, just studied him with those intense dark eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice rough, as if she hadn't used it in days. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone wary, but not hostile. Jake hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "I'm Jake," he said simply. "I'm the one who pulled you out of that trap." The woman's eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed to relax. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection to her, even though they were complete strangers. But there was something more to this situation, something deeper that he couldn't shake. As the evening wore on, Jake found himself sitting by the fire outside the tent, trying to process everything. The chief's words were still ringing in his ears. "You will marry her." The thought of marrying someone he barely knew, especially someone so different from anyone he had ever imagined being with, made him feel uneasy. But there was something about her, her strength, her resilience, that made Jake feel like maybe this was his path, whether he liked it or not. He didn't want to be part of the Apache tribe's world, but it seemed like he had no choice now. The more he thought about it, the more Jake realized that his life had changed forever the moment he had pulled her from the bear trap. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, was no ordinary woman. She was strong, and she had a presence that commanded respect. And now, her fate and his were tied together. The next morning, as the sun rose, Jake went to see her again. This time, she was sitting up, her leg bandaged but still bruised. Her eyes locked onto his as he entered the tent, and for a brief moment, Jake saw a flash of something in her gaze, something that was more than just gratitude. It was determination. She was no longer just a woman he had saved. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Jake had a feeling that his life would never be the same. As he stepped into the tent, he took a deep breath and spoke. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, Jake saw the hint of a smile on her lips. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was strong, capable, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was ready for whatever came next, just as he was. I have to admit, Jake hadn't expected to feel the way he did. He had been used to the silence of the open plains, to the solitude of his ranch. But here, with the Apache woman sitting across from him, it was as if the world had changed. He watched as she slowly tested her leg, the injury still tender but healing, the look in her eyes one of quiet determination. He couldn't help but respect her. She was a warrior in every sense of the word. After a long moment, Jake spoke. "I need to know more about you. Your people. Your life. Why are you here alone?" She looked at him, her dark eyes filled with both strength and sorrow. She didn't answer right away, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "My name is Ayana," she said. "I am the daughter of Chief Takakota, leader of the Redstone Apache. I was raised to fight, to survive. But I was forced to leave my people." Jake frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What happened?" Ayana hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the distant mountains. "There was a time when my people were at war with the settlers. The white man came to take our land, our resources. My father fought for our land, for our way of life. But there were betrayals. Many of our warriors fell." Her voice trailed off, and Jake could see the pain in her eyes. "And you were forced to leave?" Jake asked gently. She nodded. "Yes, I am not like the others. I am strong, but I am not a man. The settlers wanted me dead. My father sent me away to protect me. And so, I live alone now, until I am called to return." Jake sat back, absorbing her. words. He had heard stories about the Apache, about their fierce warriors and their struggles with the settlers. But hearing it from Ayanna, seeing the pain in her eyes, made him realize how much he didn't know. He couldn't even begin to understand the burden she carried. He could see that her strength wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was a strength born from surviving unimaginable hardship. Jake cleared his throat, trying to push aside the feelings stirring inside him. "So, what happens now?" he asked, though he knew deep down that his question wasn't just about the future of the Apache tribe. He was asking about his own future and about his place in all of this. Ayanna looked at him with a piercing gaze. "You will marry me," she said simply. Jake blinked, taken aback. "You heard my father. You saved my life. The chief demands it. But it is more than that, Jake. I need someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Someone who can stand by my side." Jake swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what to say. He had never imagined his life turning out this way. He had always been a lone wolf, content with his solitary existence. But now, here he was, caught in the middle of a world he didn't fully understand, with a woman who was both a warrior and a leader, offering him a life he wasn't sure he was ready for. Ayanna's words rang in his ears. "You saved me. You gave me a chance to live. And now, you are bound to me." It was a heavy weight to bear, one that Jake wasn't sure he was ready for. But as he looked at Ayanna, something stirred within him. She wasn't like anyone he had ever known. Her strength, her resilience. It was something that drew him in, something that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, this was the path he was meant to take. Jake stood up slowly, his boots scraping against the dirt floor of the tent. He walked toward the entrance, the weight of the decision hanging heavily on his shoulders. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said, his voice low. Ayanna didn't say anything at first. She simply watched him, her eyes steady. "You don't have to be ready," she said softly. "You just have to stand beside me. That's all I need." Jake turned back to look at her. She wasn't asking for him to be something he wasn't. She was asking him to be her equal, to stand by her side, to fight for something greater than himself. And in that moment, Jake realized something. He didn't have to be ready for everything. He just had to be ready for her. "I am not sure if I'm ready for this either," Jake said, the words heavy in the air between them. Ayanna remained still, her eyes not leaving his, as if searching him for something he couldn't quite understand. "You don't need to be ready," she replied softly, her voice steady. "This isn't about being ready. This is about what comes next. And right now, it comes with me." Jake was silent for a moment. His mind raced, the weight of her words sinking in. The simplicity of her request seemed to pull him in two directions. One toward the life he had known, isolated and independent, and the other toward something entirely new, a life bound by honor, duty, and a connection he couldn't yet name. "You saved me," Ayanna continued, her gaze never wavering. "And now, I'll do the same for you. We fight for each other, Jake. That's what matters." Jake let out a long breath, running his hand through his hair. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but this was different. This was a fight for something deeper than survival. It was a fight for trust, for a bond that was slowly forming between them, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. He looked at Ayanna, this woman who had survived so much, who had been forged by hardship and strength, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had thought. She had offered him a place in her world, in her life, and though it was terrifying, it was also a chance for something new. "What do we do now?" Jake asked, his voice quiet, but there was a new resolve in his words. Ayanna's lips curled into a faint smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. "We prepare," she said simply. "The chief will call for the wedding soon. But before that, we need to ensure that our people are safe. There's a threat looming over us." Jake furrowed his brow, confusion crossing his face. "What kind of threat?" Ayanna's smile faded, her eyes darkening as she spoke. "There are settlers who are trying to encroach on our land, and there are those who would see our tribe wiped out. The chief has been gathering warriors, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Jake nodded slowly, understanding now that this wasn't just about marriage. This was about survival, about standing together against the forces that threatened everything Ayanna and her people had fought to protect. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the Apache camp, Jake felt a shift in his heart. He wasn't just some outsider anymore. He was part of something bigger. He had saved Ayana's life, and now she was asking him to stand by her side, not just as her husband, but as her partner in the fight ahead. The bond they shared was growing stronger, even if it was still in its infancy. Jake knew that there was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and whatever came next, he would face it with Ayana by his side. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Jake worked alongside the Apache warriors, learning their ways, understanding the strength that came from their unity. Ayana taught him about the land, about the sacred places that held meaning for her people, and about the deep-rooted connections that bound them together. They trained together, fought together, and shared quiet moments under the stars, speaking of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. As the day of the wedding drew nearer, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't sure what his life would look like after this, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking this path alone anymore. And that thought, strange as it was, felt like the beginning of something powerful. The morning of the wedding arrived, and the Apache camp was alive with activity. Warriors prepared their weapons. The women decorated the area with intricate beadwork and symbols of protection. Jake stood at the center of it all, dressed in the traditional clothing that had been given to him, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a joining of two worlds, a merging of two lives that had been on separate paths, now brought together by fate. As Ayana walked toward him, her powerful form moving with grace, Jake couldn't help but be in awe of her. She was a woman who had fought and survived, a woman who had endured the harshest of trials, and yet, here she was, standing before him. She wasn't just his bride. She was his equal, his partner, and his strength. The chief stepped forward, his voice carrying across the camp. "Jake Riley, do you take Ayana, daughter of Chief Takakota, to be your wife, your partner, and your equal, in life and in battle?" Jake's voice was steady as he replied, "I do." The chief turned to Ayana. "Ayana, daughter of Takakota, do you take Jake Riley, the man who saved your life, to be your husband, your partner, and your equal, in life and in battle?" Ayana looked at Jake, her dark eyes softening. "I do," she said, her voice strong and clear. The ceremony was simple, yet profound, a testament to the strength of their bond. As they exchanged vows, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it, side by side with Ayana. I have to admit, Jake was still getting used to the idea of being bound to Ayana, not just by the vows they had exchanged, but by a promise he hadn't fully understood at first. The days after the wedding had flown by in a blur of preparation and training, and while he had grown closer to Ayana, there was still much to learn about what it meant to live among the Apache. The moment they had been waiting for was finally upon them. The warriors were preparing for battle. Word had spread that a group of settlers had been spotted on the outskirts of Apache land, attempting to stake a claim. The tension in the camp was palpable, and Ayana's role as a leader, as the daughter of Chief Takakota, was becoming clearer to Jake with every passing hour. She wasn't just a wife. She was a warrior, a strategist, and someone who had a deep connection to the land and people she fought for. Jake stood at the edge of the camp, watching Ayana move among the warriors. Her strength was undeniable, and the way the warriors respected her, listened to her, made something stir inside him. It wasn't just respect, it was admiration, a recognition of her leadership. He had seen the power of her presence, but now, seeing how she commanded the respect of her people, he understood why the chief had made the demand that she be his wife. She was a force to be reckoned with, and he had chosen to stand by her side. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that would change his life forever. As the sun set behind the mountains, the Apache warriors gathered in the center of the camp, preparing for the journey ahead. Ayana approached Jake, her expression focused but soft. "We leave at dawn," she said, her voice steady. "We will move quickly. We can't afford to waste time. If the settlers are building on our land, they will take everything from us. We will not let that happen." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had heard stories about the Apache's fight to protect their land, but standing here now, with Ayana by his side, he realized that the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about preserving a way of life, a culture, and a home. "I'm with you," Jake said quietly, his hand resting on the hilt of his rifle. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Ayana's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something more in her eyes, trust. She nodded, and without another word, she turned and walked back to join the warriors. Jake followed her, feeling the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. He was no longer just a lone cowboy. He was part of this tribe, part of a fight for something that mattered more than anything he had ever known. The next morning, they set out at dawn, the air cool and crisp as the sun began to rise. The warriors moved with purpose, their horses steady and sure as they crossed the rugged terrain. Jake rode alongside Ayana, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing quite like this. The unity of the Apache people, their bond to the land, and the strength they drew from each other. As they neared the settlers' camp, Ayana signaled for the group to halt. She rode forward alone, her posture tall and commanding. Jake watched as she approached the settlement, the settlers' faces turning pale as they saw the Apache warriors. It was clear that they hadn't expected a confrontation like this. Ayana didn't speak at first. She simply stood tall, her presence filling the space between the settlers and the Apache warriors. "This land belongs to my people," Ayana said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You have no right to take it. Leave now, and we will let you go in peace." The settlers hesitated, and for a moment, the tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. One of the settlers stepped forward, a man with a grizzled face and a rifle slung over his shoulder. "We have a claim," he said, his voice thick with defiance. "We have the right to settle here. You can't stop us." Ayana's eyes narrowed, and Jake could see the fire in her gaze. "I will not allow you to steal from my people," she said firmly. "This is your final warning." As the words left her mouth, Jake felt a shift in the air. The battle was about to begin, and there was no turning back now. He looked to Ayana, who rode forward, leading the charge, her warriors following in her wake. He followed her, knowing that whatever happened next, he was no longer just a cowboy fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater, for a future he hadn't expected to find, but one that he was willing to die for. I can feel the tension building in the air as the two forces faced off across the dusty clearing. The settlers, a group of about 20, were clearly unprepared for what was happening. They had expected a simple encounter, maybe a few words exchanged, a few threats, but nothing that would escalate into a battle. But now, facing Ayana and her warriors, they knew the stakes had changed. Jake rode alongside Ayana, his rifle resting in his lap as he surveyed the scene. The Apache warriors were positioned strategically, their expressions unwavering, ready to protect what was theirs. They had fought this battle for generations, and Jake realized, as he sat beside them, that this was no longer just a fight over land. This was a fight for their way of life. He could see the fear in the settlers' eyes, and a small part of him felt a pang of sympathy. They had come here, seeking something they felt entitled to, but they had underestimated the resolve of the Apache people. And now, there would be no turning back. "We're not looking for a fight," one of the settlers spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. He looked to Ayana, trying to find a way to reason with her, to avoid what he could sense was coming. "We only want a place to live, a place for our families. This land, it's all we have left." Ayana's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in her gaze, only determination. "You have no right to take what belongs to my people," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is our land, and we will fight for it." The settler stepped back, but another man, older and more hardened, took his place, his hand on the grip of his rifle. "We've got a claim," the man spat. "You can't stop us. The law's on our side." Ayana's gaze never wavered. "The law is a tool of the strong," she said. "It does not protect those who are oppressed." Jake watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been part of a battle like this. Back on his ranch, the fights were small, personal. But this was about the survival of a people. As Ayana turned to face her warriors, giving them a signal, Jake knew the battle was inevitable. He had seen how quickly things could escalate, how the smallest spark could ignite a fire. And now, they were the spark. The settlers looked around, trying to decide whether to make a stand or flee. But before they could act, Ayana raised her hand, and with a swift motion, the Apache warriors surged forward. The battle was upon them. Jake was caught in the chaos, his heart racing as he followed the warriors. He was no longer just a bystander. He was part of something far bigger than himself. The sound of gunfire filled the air, sharp cracks that rang out against the land. Jake ducked low, firing his rifle in quick succession, his movements instinctive as he followed Ayana's lead. She was a force of nature, moving through the fight with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Her presence, her strength, was magnetic. Jake followed her, his rifle steady in his hands, his body moving on autopilot as he fought beside the Apache warriors. The settlers were outmatched, their shots wild and scattered, while the Apache warriors were calm and focused, their every movement calculated. As the battle raged on, Jake felt the weight of it all, the weight of history, the weight of the lives at stake. The settlers had come to claim what they thought was theirs, but they had not prepared for the strength of the Apache people. And as the dust began to settle, Jake saw the survivors of the battle, their faces grim, their weapons lowered. The fight had ended, but the cost had been high. Ayana rode through the battlefield, her gaze scanning the area. She had led them to victory, but the price was clear. Jake dismounted, his legs shaky as the adrenaline began to wear off. He looked around, seeing the faces of the warriors, their expressions hard but proud. They had defended their land, and they had won. Ayana approached Jake, her expression unreadable. "We won today," she said quietly. "But this fight is far from over." Jake nodded, his heart still racing. "I know," he said, "but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm part of something that matters." Ayana looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time. "You are," she said. "We fight together, Jake. Always." And for the first time, Jake understood. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future of the Apache people, for Ayana, and for a way of life that had been threatened for far too long. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. I know the battle was over, but the aftermath left Jake with more questions than answers. As he stood at the edge of the camp, watching the warriors tend to their wounded, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like a 1,000-pound boulder. The settlers had retreated, their claim abandoned, but the victory felt hollow. This wasn't just about land. It was about something much deeper, something Jake wasn't sure he fully understood yet. Ayana rode over to him, her expression calm despite the tension in the air. She had led them through the battle, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes now, something Jake couldn't quite place. "You did well today," she said, her voice steady but not without the faintest trace of weariness. Jake nodded, but the words didn't sit right with him. "We won the battle," he said slowly, "but the war feels like it's just begun." Ayana's gaze softened as she dismounted her horse and approached him. "It has," she agreed. "This land is not just ours to protect. It's our way of life, our future, and there will always be those who want to take it from us." She paused, looking over the camp where the warriors were gathering around the fire, tending to their injuries, sharing quiet words. "This is our fight now, Jake, and it won't end until we ensure our people are safe." Jake swallowed hard, the reality of her words settling deep within him. He had come here seeking something he couldn't quite put into words. But now, standing by Ayana's side, he realized that what he had found wasn't just a purpose. It was a life he couldn't walk away from. The next morning, after a quiet and tense night, Jake stood with Ayana as the camp prepared to move. The threat of the settlers had been momentarily pushed back, but Jake knew this wouldn't be the last time they faced this kind of battle. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was a part of something bigger, part of the Apache people's fight for survival. Ayana led the way, her movements as graceful and strong as ever, her gaze unwavering. Jake rode beside her, his mind still processing everything. The land, the people, the life they fought for. It was all so different from the world he had known. And yet, it felt right. It felt like he had found a place where he belonged. They traveled for days, moving through the rugged terrain, staying on alert. Jake had never seen such resilience before. The Apache warriors were strong, their unity unshakable. They were a people bound together by more than just blood. They were bound by their love for their land, their culture, and their future. As they reached the edge of their territory, Ayana called for a stop. She turned to Jake, her face serious. "We're close to the settlement again," she said, her voice low. "This is where they will come for us. The settlers will not give up so easily." Jake nodded, his hand resting on his rifle. What do we do now? Ayanna met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. Now, we protect what's ours. We fight for our future, for our people, and we show them that we are not afraid. The words were simple, but Jake felt their weight. He had seen the strength in Ayanna, the courage in the warriors who stood by her, and he realized, in that moment, that he wasn't just following her. He was standing with her, fighting by her side. The battle wasn't just for land. It was for the future of the Apache people. And Jake was ready to face whatever came next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the desert, Jake stood tall. The winds howled around him, the same winds that had carried him here, that had brought him to this moment. The sound of the warriors preparing for the fight ahead filled the air, but it wasn't fear that Jake felt. It was resolve. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. The world he had known was gone, replaced by something much greater. A family, a future, a fight that would never be over. Ayanna stood beside him, her gaze as steady as the mountains in the distance. And together, they would face whatever came next. The day had arrived. The final battle was upon them. As the Apache warriors lined up, the wind whipped through the desert, carrying with it the scent of dust and the promise of war. Jake stood at the edge of the camp, his heart steady but his mind racing. The settlers had underestimated them, but they were determined now. They knew what was at stake, and they would fight with everything they had. Ayanna rode forward, her presence as commanding as ever. Her eyes were filled with the fire of 1,000 battles fought and won, and Jake could see the strength in her, not just as a warrior, but as a leader. This wasn't just her fight. It was his now, too. The Apache warriors had gathered behind her, their faces set in determination. They were ready. They had always been ready. But Jake, for the first time, truly understood what this was all about. This wasn't just a fight for land. It was a fight for survival, for a future that could be stolen in an instant. He had been drawn into this battle not by choice, but by fate. He had saved Ayanna, and now, together, they would protect her people. He had never known what it meant to stand up for something greater than himself, but here, with Ayanna by his side, he understood. This was not just about him anymore. It was about a future, a family, a way of life that had to be preserved. As the first shots rang out across the desert, Jake didn't hesitate. He was part of this now. He was not just a cowboy anymore. He was a warrior, a protector, and he would fight to the end. He followed Ayanna, staying close to her side as they charged forward. The Apache warriors moved like a well-oiled machine, their every step in sync, their every action purposeful. The settlers, on the other hand, were scattered and disorganized, caught off guard by the ferocity of the Apache counterattack. Jake fired his rifle, the sound of it echoing through the desert, the shots ringing true. The settlers fought back, but it was clear they were no match for the Apache warriors. They had fought too long, too hard to let anyone take what was theirs. As the battle raged on, Jake felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about living, about standing up for what was right. And for the first time, he realized that he wasn't just fighting beside Ayanna. He was fighting for her, for everything she represented: strength, honor, and a future that couldn't be taken away. The battle seemed to stretch on forever, but in the end, it was over. The settlers had been driven off, their claim defeated, their plans shattered. Jake stood amidst the dust and the smoke, his heart pounding in his chest, his body sore from the fight. But there was a sense of peace in the aftermath. The Apache had won. Ayanna rode up to him, her expression fierce but proud. "We did it," she said, her voice strong but tinged with something softer. Jake looked at her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between them, the bond that had grown stronger with every challenge they faced. "We did," he agreed. For a moment, they simply stood there, the dust settling around them, the air filled with the silence that follows after a storm. They had fought for this, fought for each other, and now they had secured a future. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the land, Jake felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He had found a place, a purpose, and a woman who understood him in a way no one else ever had. They rode back to the camp together, side by side, knowing that there would be more battles ahead. But they were ready. Together, they were unstoppable,